Greetings, Herle Burlyites, old and new. If you're a loyal listener to the pod and you've been taking notes, and why wouldn't you be, you know I'm from a place called Prelate, Saskatchewan, in the rural municipality of Happyland, 7 miles from Leader. That's where my dad farmed. That's where he was the mayor and the reeve of the municipality. That's where my mother raised our family. That's where my sister went into the convent and became a nun for a period of time. I have small town Canada in my blood. But I also know that my parents packed up and left Prelate in 1967 as it grew smaller and the opportunities there shrunk. They left to Regina so that their 3 youngest kids, including me, could get an education and have a shot at a decent life. So I know how vital rural connectivity and access to technology is for communities all across this vast country. And our presenting sponsor, TELUS, leads the way, bringing their world-class network to remote parts of Canada, building new cell towers, and connecting our towns and villages with their leading pure fiber technology. In fact, just last month, TELUS completed their work to connect every single community in British Columbia with 1,000 people or more to their award-winning 4G LTE wireless network. That's in addition to the many smaller communities with fewer than 1,000 residents that TELUS has connected. In the words of Brad Unger, mayor of Gold River, BC, this is going to increase tourism and business opportunities for us. It'll also be a huge benefit to our protective services like police, fire, ambulance, and our health clinic. Stories like this are the result of billions of dollars in investment that TELUS is making in communities big and small to improve the lives of Canadians and ensure that everyone is all connected for good. To learn more, go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca. All right, I'm David Herle.
Hang on. Not a word more.
Wait.
Not a word more.
What?
One of your sisters went into the convent?
Yeah? Who?
Not Elise.
No, my sister Irene. She was the third in the family, and here was the situation. There were 3 kids in a row, bang, bang, bang.
Right.
And the first one, the eldest son, got to go to university. So my parents had enough money to send him to university. And the second child, my sister Kathy, wanted to be a doctor, but there was no money to send her to medical school, so she had to become a nurse.
Right. I knew that, I think.
And for Irene, or Reenie as we called her, there was no money for nothing. So she became a nun.
So how come you weren't called to the cloth by the time you rolled around? There must not have been a penny left in the cupboard.
Well, there wasn't a seminary in Prelate, thank God. But there was a convent. It was the home of the Ursuline Academy.
Oh.
There had a girls' school there that was basically the place where people sent their bad girls to get straightened out.
You're smiling.
Well, the truth of my story is exactly what's in the TELUS ad, which is that my parents packed up and left for Regina in 1967, and my mom got a job as a teacher.
Right.
And then we were living in the city then, so it didn't cost as much money to go to university.
Why did she leave the seminary? What was the circumstance around that, if we're not invading her privacy too greatly?
Well, we are, because we don't speak about that. So,
all right.
I don't know. Reenie listens to this podcast religiously, so to speak.
Maybe she never really left.
All right. We will stop talking about my sister. She'll be absolutely mortified. Welcome to the Herle Burly, Canada's only political podcast, featuring a host who owns a guitar that was once owned by Byrne and a garlic press that was once owned by the Galloping Gourmet. Okay, I'm kidding about the garlic press, but Graham Kerr, let me take this opportunity to salute you. You were an underappreciated 1970s entertainment genius who, along with The Trouble with Tracy, pretty much owned afternoon TV in the world of 2 Channels Canada. We're back this week with our ever-insightful political panel, Scott Reid and Jenni Byrne, both of them brilliant, both of them hugely entertaining and funny. We've got a big agenda today. We're going to talk coronavirus and the economic impact, because probably 80% of you have lost 10% of your wealth in the last 24 hours. You might be interested in this subject. We're going to talk about Stephen Del Duca and the Ontario Liberal leadership race. We're going to talk about the latest developments in the Conservative leadership race, particularly Mr. Kenney. We're going to talk about Joe and Bernie and the lack of meritocracy in the Democratic leadership race. And we're going to talk about white license plates, blue license plates, back into white license plates, and the Ford government. Let's get at it.
I'm so sick of talking about license plates.
Well, it's been the longest running issue. We were making jokes about this a month ago.
Yes.
Right. So we'll get to the license plates and we'll have a chance.
I'm hoping we run out of time.
Let's start with coronavirus. It has obviously become something more than just a public health concern now. It has become something that is impacting on the economics of the country, of the world, something that's impacting on every event that's possibly going on in the country. So it presents a very multifaceted challenge for government. And we had, last time we talked about this, I think generally been in agreement that the government was handling it well. And they generally continue to get, from what I can see, general kudos for how they're handling it. But Jenni, you've actually been in this kind of circumstance. How do you think they're doing?
I actually, listen, I thought it was February 11th when we met and we talked about it to begin with. It's been a month since then, and I'm not sure they've been staying up on they've been on the ball in the ball as much. Last week you had the health minister Patty Hedju went out and started basically telling people her message was you've got to start stockpiling information or stockpiling supplies, things like toilet paper. I have no idea why this worldwide sensation of buying toilet paper is happening. It's a respiratory illness.
I chose Old Dutch potato chips to stockpile on myself.
I was stockpiling toilet paper before it was cool. Okay, this has been something I've been onto for a while.
So I'm not sure. Yesterday, there was a travel advisory put out. I think that was a bit late. If there seems to be more effort to get people back from cruise ships, even though we've been talking about this for a month now. If you left on a cruise a month ago, you are in the last month. You're kind of on your own. I think the government can get to you, but I don't think it's the priority that it's at. I think government should be looking at things like, and this goes across the board for provincial governments, at actually shutting down all public long-term care facilities. I think the most vulnerable for this virus are the elderly and those that are sick. And that we had our first death, unfortunately, at a long-term care facility in BC yesterday. And so I think that that's what government should be looking at. I also think there's one dynamic that I've heard no one talk about, but there was a dog in Hong Kong that developed the strain of the Corona-19 from a human. So we now know this is like H1N1. It can cross between human and animals. And what impact could this have on the agriculture sector if somehow a chicken or turkey or a pig or cow farm ends up getting infected? And that's one of the things that we had to deal with in terms of H1N1 and the effect that it had on the agriculture sector and the economy.
What is the Fed-Prov distinction on this? Whose job is what?
Well, the long-term care facilities would be provincially based. The only federal ones would be veterans hospitals, for example. But like to be fair to certain provincial governments, like Christine Elliott's been doing daily press conferences with her health officials for almost the last 3.5 weeks.
I'm generally pretty forgiving about where all governments in Canada have been on this. I think that, and I don't mean forgiving in the sense that they've been doing a poor job, but we should let it slide. I think that they've actually been working as best they can in a very complicated, complex situation, trying to keep on top of it. I do think it's time for the federal government to start to take this. Yeah, I think that we're recording this on Tuesday the 10th. I think yesterday, Monday the 9th, things shifted to a different place with the combination of what happened in Saudi Arabia hitting the oil markets with coronavirus and a general market crisis.
Well, and we've had blockades also in the last month.
Yeah, but that's not really affecting. Yesterday, when we dropped 1,200 points, I mean, it
doesn't help.
It's a pointed. Well, maybe it doesn't help, but it's not really a causal effect in my view. But I think we're in a situation now where it's actually more complicated. It may be less complicated than H1N1 so far from a public health perspective, although we don't know where this thing crests. So there's no legitimate criticism of anything as being overkill and too panicky, because since we can't see the summit of it, we don't know what is too precautionary.
So what's the rule then? Just overshoot?
Well, but you got to be careful of that. You can't overshoot, because if you do now, and the reason I mentioned the economic impacts is that this is also different than 2008, which is getting raised a lot yesterday and was being referenced constantly. 2008, the Great Recession, the financial crisis, but it's different than that, because in that circumstance, as long as central banks move to increase liquidity and keep the banking system moving, then it could recover. But now we have a situation where markets are going to be impacted. We've got public health and no real line of sight as to exactly how large the problem is going to get and where the spread is. Look at Italy and think, Jesus, right? Is that an anomaly, or is that our future? And does it get worse there, and therefore will get worse even here?
Well, and Italy and Japan are hit the hardest because their populations are older.
Right, but we're not exactly a country of spring chickens, right? So, I mean, we just don't know where it goes. So you've got to be precautionary in your approach as governments, but you also have to keep in mind that you don't want to grind the entire country to a halt, because unlike 2008, it isn't just a matter of a quantitative easing or injecting some interest rate cuts, monetary stimulus, and then everything starts moving again. If people don't leave their homes, businesses will stop, and cutting the interest rate won't reverse that. And so this is becoming really complex. I think if there's one criticism I have of the government so far, it's that we need the finance minister to gather FedProv, have a conference call right now of FedProv finance ministers and say, what kind of coordinated action do we need to do? What signals do we send immediately? What signals do we send a week and a half from now? What are we doing on leave issues? What are we doing in terms of compensating businesses where employees need to stay home? Think about the retail sector, where people are going to have to say, well, you know what? If you're not feeling well, you stay home. Well, the impact on that, on small and medium-sized business, is going to be enormous. That's a place where government can play a remedying, or at least a tonic effect. So I think we need to hear more on that. I wouldn't move the budget up. I would hold the budget.
Many people, by the way, can't afford to take a day off.
That's right. And so government needs to demonstrate to people that actually you can, right? We are going to finance a way for small businesses to tolerate that, so that you can tolerate that and you can make that decision. And that void should be filled now.
Well, and that's something
next 48 hours.
That's something the American government's looking at. Trump was out last night and said that they're looking at, in terms of making changes to payroll taxes, they're looking at compensating people that earn an hourly wage, and they're also working with the airline, cruise ship, and hotel industries, because they know that there's going to be such a hit on the tourism industry that it's going to be devastating for anyone that works in those sectors.
And because, to your question,
he's particularly sensitive to that, of course.
Yeah, I know.
No.
But to your question,
you guys are anyways.
Oh, come on! You can't criticize us for criticizing Trump's response to this. I got a natural ability. The doctors can't believe how smart I am. Everybody, don't worry, it's no big deal. Can we use the flu vaccine? No, you can't use the fucking flu vaccine. It's not the flu. Measles won't work, and neither will rabies. You stupid prick.
Well, to your point, the American government is much further ahead than what the Canadian government is, because Morneau should have already done that. I know that Freeland and Trudeau sent a letter to premiers yesterday ahead of the First Ministers meeting on Friday, asking them what their provincial plans are around Corona. That being said, Corona is not this is not good for the economy. But yesterday's drop in the markets, that was caused by the pissing match between Saudi Arabia and Russia.
Well, I think it was triggered in part, but it becomes, this is a world in which we live. I'm not saying
Corona helps it. I'm just saying, but and we can get into.
I'm not quoting them. I'm just saying it has an amplifying effect. I think that would have seen a significant economic impact, but we would have been able to look past it in the current circumstances, where you compound it with, is the economy about to seize up? You see a sell-off of 1,200, and we don't know what's going to happen today.
But wait a second. Forgetting them. Well, don't forget the market, I guess, because that's important to everybody that's got savings and pensions. But regardless of what the impact was on the stock market, oil prices are what they are right now.
That's right.
Right? And that is because in part because of the virus, but I think in large measure because of the Saudis' moves, which are aimed mostly at Russia, my understanding is, but they're also pretty happy to be sideswiping shale in the United States and undercutting shale in the United States. But the net result of that is devastating for the Canadian economy.
Absolutely
Alberta and Saskatchewan have provincial budgets that are based on double that current price of oil.
$63 a barrel, yeah.
Right.
So let me ask this question, right? Because then, and this is where Corona folds into this, because if those are the trigger for the collapse in oil price, which they are, and we can assign all
and
of those
nothing in the oil
motivations.
sands is viable at $30.
No. Virtually nothing is anywhere, right? I mean, but the question is, because of coronavirus, how much of a barrier does it become to a rally, right? If policy decisions change, right, in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, and pressure builds, and so there's shift in that, do markets nevertheless fail to respond because fears of coronavirus mean that they think there's going to be a global recession, and so that the thing that triggered it isn't remedied by change in policy, and instead we end up in a world where this may be, we're stuck in a horse's latitude for, I don't know, you tell me, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. This is why it's impossible to bring down a budget that has economic projections. You can't eyeball the price of oil right now. And if you can't do that, you can't deliver a federal or provincial budget.
Do you think the budget should be delayed?
No. I don't think it should be delayed.
Some people have suggested that it should be a economic statement as opposed to a budget.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think they could get away with that if they hadn't half-assed the fall economic statement.
Half-assed. They fully asked it. There was no economic statement in December,
exactly.
Right? Like it was.
So I think they could have done that. Listen, could they delay it a couple weeks? Sure. They haven't announced the date yet, so they can do it whenever they want. Like budgets, that's the beauty of it. We've seen budgets in February. We've seen them in April. So they haven't announced the date, so they can absolutely decide what to do. I know I heard some commentators saying, well, what about the budget lockups? Well, the San Jose Sharks are playing with no fans, and Alex Trebek's doing Jeopardy with no audience participation. I think the media across the country and a bunch of lobbyists can figure out a way to get information on the budget. They don't need to do a lockup. Like, I think if that's the excuse they're doing, that's a complete in the fucking bubble reason to not do it. But I don't think that I don't think with the challenges with the devastating effects that the drop in oil is going to have on the Canadian economy, if this doesn't rally and if the government does not handle this properly, Canada will be in a full-blown recession. Without investment into the oil sands, there is no way we do not slip into a recession. And unlike the last recession, we are billions of dollars in debt. We do not have the capacity. We do not have the capacity to be able to do the stimulus package like what we did.
Sure we do. The parliamentary budget officer said that we could spend $40 billion more than we're currently spending and not move the debt to GDP ratio up.
And I think we may end up doing that. Here's my. I've given this an embarrassing.
Which would then put us close to $75 billion in debt.
Right, and Harper
deficit.
took us to $40 billion in deficit, and then we
$55 billion.
$55 billion, and then you reverse it because you know what? Extraordinary actions force extraordinary moves.
Yes,
right?
but when that happened, we were in a surplus. I know you liberal talking points like to say we hit the 2008 election in deficit, but we weren't. There was a surplus, and then we'd had the $55 billion stimulus package, which we got into the economy very quickly. Oh, look at you smiling at me. David and I went at each other on Twitter last night. We
I know,
that.
I saw it, and I didn't weigh in.
I never went at you. I never went at anybody. I merely commented on Mr. Poilievre's observation, right? And then other people endorsed my observation, and then you took issue with my observation.
No, I didn't.
And other people endorsed your position.
I didn't take issue. I felt I needed to say. So we put $55 billion worth of stimulus into the Canadian economy and actually came out the other side at a much better position than the other G7 nations.
It was a success. I'm not going to bitch and moan about it. I'm not going to quarrel with it. There's no partisan reason to do that. What I'm saying is we're probably on the brink of another such moment where we're going to have to wildly inflate the deficit. In order to add stimulus into the marketplace. Again, it's just not obvious that stimulus will have the same kind of effect as it did in 2008. But here's what I would do, in all honesty.
Well,
and I've thought about it a lot.
I saw one commentator today saying if you don't do like between 30 and 40 billion.
Don't bother.
Don't bother because it's not going to have an impact.
And I agree with that. And so, here's what I would do in terms of the budget. I think since the budget fundamentally, it's actually the opposite of the economic statement thing. I don't think that we need an economic statement, which fundamentally is just an outline of projections and numbers. I think we need the opposite. Don't
forget that the Bank of Canada dropped their rate again too, by the way.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we need we need fiscal policy to start catching up with monetary policy. I think we need, and I mean in days, not weeks. I think we need in days measures. So I wouldn't worry about bringing the budget forward. I would announce measures. I would announce stimulus. I would announce a stimulus package. I would announce a bunch of policy like leave and benefits packages like we're talking about. I would announce all that kind of stuff. And I would announce a huge stimulus package. I would try to get that out into the marketplace as soon as possible. And I would delay the formal budget until such time as we get on the other side of this mountain, because we don't know how high it is. We don't know how much it's going to alter our projections. So kick it to April, May, whatever, but get measures in. What I did not like was seeing the finance minister last night on CTV saying, you know what, it's important that we not think of the budget as an event. Well, actually, it is important that we think of it as an event. It drives me bananas that this finance minister and this government have not regarded budgets as an event. They've not said this is what our narrative and economic storyline is, and this is we're going to husband our resources and blow them out the door and make a change and have an impact on an annual basis, both in an economic statement and in a budget. And I think if we had, there would be a greater sense of confidence about what we're doing now. But in any event, don't delay, do not just hold the budget whenever, right? Do measures now, hold the budget later, afterwards, once you can project economically on a sound basis. That's what I would do. So
considering where we're sitting in the conversation that we're having on Corona and the economy, this first ministers meeting coming up on Thursday night, Friday, it's one of the most important. It's a doozy. It's one of the most important meetings that I can think of in modern history.
Yes.
And I think Saskatchewan voters should hunker down for an election, because I don't think there's any way that Scott Moe's going to bring in a budget under these circumstances before he goes to another budget.
Well, I heard that there's going to be an election soon.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to have to reconcile these oil prices with actual budget actions in those two prairie provinces.
And because Jason just brought his budget in 2 weeks ago, and
it's stale dated.
It doesn't make any sense now. It's $58. I think so
63. I think they used. Yes.
No one should bring in a budget. It's not. Whatever budget you would bring in right now, if you're going to actually estimate what oil prices are as the backbone of your economic outlook, it's bound to be incorrect.
Well, what if they're $30 though? What if the new normal is $30?
Well, they've rallied a bit today, and they've gone up $5. So we were looking at $35, $36. I don't think it'll probably stay the new normal, but it could stay for months, which is still devastating for the economy. So I will concede that they can delay the budget, but they actually have to show that if they're going to bring in stimulus or have some kind of economic update, it cannot fucking be what they've done in the past. It has to be real.
Well, it has to be substantial, both in volume and then, as you say, executing it matters, right? But some of that stuff can be done pretty easily, right? Some of the stuff, if you're talking about massive amounts of, changes to benefits, that's done through tax forms. That can be done through existing systems. It's when you want to flow money, right, to destinations. That's when it gets more complicated. That's when you have lots of margin for screw up. Like if you say, okay, well, we don't want these small businesses, all these retail outlets who are letting people stay home. We don't want them to suffer. What's a mechanism for them recovering cash now? You got to get it to them. You send them a check. How do you send them a check? That's when governments fuck up stuff.
I would give Carl Littler at the Retail Council, I would just slip him a brown envelope with the cash. He'll distribute it properly to everybody.
That's exactly right. Well, Carl's one of the 5 people in the country that can figure this out fast.
Speaking of coronavirus, I spent the weekend with 2,500 to 3,000 Ontario Liberals.
Exciting.
Oh my God. You have to see this international center in Mississauga to believe it.
Oh, I've been there.
What a castle. What a palace this place is.
It's as big as Texas, and there's no bar. I got there on Friday night. I'm like, okay, well, great. I'm here a little bit early. I can at least have a beer. No, you can't have a beer. Yeah. I think there's like a Subway stand or something. There's like a window where you can get like a meatball sub, and that's it. And I'm like, I want out of here. There's no getting out of there, man. No. You need a compass. Right.
Go from wing A to wing N or whatever. It's
huge.
It's deadly. So anyway, they had a convention out there, and Jenni, I don't know if you were following, they elected a new leader of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, big surprise. No one would have predicted. No one would have predicted that.
Yeah, it went exactly as forecast. Stephen Del Duca with a convincing win on the first ballot of the convention. I think that everybody was pretty surprised and impressed by the turnout in the middle of this health issue in the middle of Mississauga.
It was a big crowd.
Big crowd at a convention that was a foregone conclusion.
It's a good momentum. It's a very good indicator for you guys.
And it felt like there was momentum there. Did you watch any of it, Jenni? Did you get a sense of how it went?
I watched some clips on online. Listen, I was impressed by the crowd. It looked professional. People seemed very excited. So I think it's on all indicators, it's good momentum for Del Duca. It seems that people are re-energized within your provincial party, and that's always a good thing for the 2 years leading into an election.
Did the party choose who the Conservatives wanted us to choose, or did they? How do the Conservatives feel about running against Del Duca?
I think you'll talk to varied people. There are some people that are saying, this is great, we're running against Stephen Del Duca, and I remind them that you guys all said that when Kathleen Wynne won the last leadership race, and then look what happened. So right. I think it would be a mistake if the Conservatives underestimated Del Duca.
What do you think? Party on the move, or what did it didn't feel? I tell you what, as somebody who has some significant amount of responsibility for the last campaign, I felt very, very grateful that it didn't look dead.
No, it definitely did not feel like you were in a funeral parlor of that place, for sure. And there was a large crowd. People seemed genuinely excited about prospects. I think a year-ish of being on top of the polls, notwithstanding that the party has a caucus as big as your left hand, and got beat so badly, I think that's actually helped. I think that's helped create a sense of, you know what, maybe this thing's doable, right? And so maybe it is. I think what's going to be interesting is for Del Duca, who, let's be candid, right? Hard worker, decent guy. Don't underestimate him. Like he does feel like, to Jenni's point, right? He feels like he's just begging to be underestimated, right? But he is not. One of the reasons for that is that he is not the world's most charismatic cat. And so I think one of the things he's going to have to do is define himself pretty quickly, because I have to assume that the Conservatives, looking at the polls, are going to say, job number one is to define that guy. Let's do a Dion/Iggy on him, define him.
Do they have lots of money?
Who?
Conservatives, the Ford people. Do they have lots of money?
I hear fundraising's going well.
Okay. But I'm sorry.
They can.
Would they have the money to do during between red advertising campaign against Del Duca?
I wouldn't be. Don't be surprised if you see.
So that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Since you know that's coming, you've got to say we have to quickly define who he is, how that contrasts with Ford, and not just in personality terms, but in some kind of what's the bargain. Like if you're going to vote for Del Duca in a year or two, what do you get out of it? And I think he's got a mood to do that pretty rapidly. Not a comprehensive picture, but something that can withstand the oncoming onslaught.
The Ford, you talked about contrasting Ford with Del Duca. Assumes Ford's the Conservative candidate in the next election, which is just interesting.
Liberals got to pray for it.
There are people who spent a lot of money against Patrick Brown, and then Patrick Brown turned out not to be the candidate, right? We talk about this once in a while. Is there any chance Doug Ford is not the leader of the Conservative Party in the next election?
I think it's a very small chance. I think he'll be the leader going into the next election.
Okay.
I'm boggled by that. I'm mind boggled by that. Like I mean, to me, in the first year of this government, right, as it careened from guardrail to guardrail, all you heard about were quiet, furtive conversations about how, the guy's got to be gone, right? Conservatives are like, when can we get rid of this guy? Like he can't, like it's be a disaster. But, you had something of, get rid of Dean French, and suddenly people were like, oh, okay, now it's back to normal. Well, you've just had this definitional fight with teachers. I think it opens up a huge vulnerability for the government that it's anti-education, because it's tough to fight teachers and be pro-education. It just is. We've seen that under Liberal premiers also. And from my perspective, I don't know why the conversation isn't as active or more active in Conservative circles about, can we afford to gamble on this guy? I would be thinking really hard about dumping him if I was a Conservative MPP, because I'd be thinking this guy, like, all things being equal, that the government ought to be reelected, but he's an anchor, not a kite.
Is there any mentality like that?
No. Listen, caucus is united. Parties raising money.
So, they have, despite, we've talked about this, they have, despite all of their problems, not fallen below roughly 30%. They haven't completely collapsed. They have a 30%. So as long as you're at 30, you're within striking distance of a win, unless that 30 has become your ceiling.
Right.
And I guess that's the question.
Listen, the factor for us always remains, how well are the NDP going to do? That's actually the question. If we're talking about, if we're having this conversation 2 years from now and we're 4 months away from, or 3 months away from the next general election, is where is Andrea Horwath going to be in the polls? And my guess is, as Del Duca, I'm sure, travels the province, as people see him, as the Liberals, you had, as you said, 2,500 people out. I'm assuming it will help with fundraising, having a permanent leader. We've talked about all the downtown Toronto seats that will probably go back to you guys. The question then is, where does the NDP go? Do they punch above their weight like they did last time, or does she go back to kind of running the same kind of
and does she start
listless
to feel
campaign?
Does she start to feel a hand on her back? I mean, from my perspective, if I was Del Duca, the number one short-term change that I would fear is a change in the NDP leadership. You take her out of the equation, have some excitement around a race, and replace her with someone else.
But who do they have? Who else is there?
Well, there's lots of people. They can recruit lots of people. I mean, I honestly think almost that I mean, she's such a demonstrated commodity. And I think that almost any change would be better. You can go just say, we're going pure downtown urban. So they take Merritt Stiles, right? And say, okay, bing, there we go, right? Chances are she makes 416 a lot more competitive for the NDP. And Steve wants to position himself as a suburbanite, then maybe that makes that math more complicated. So I would worry about that. Going back to Ford, though, just to make an all-time Herle great reference, we're getting back into BOD Doug, eh? Bit of a dick Doug. We're getting back into bit of a dick Doug. Like for a year, it seemed like he quieted down, but on teacher stuff, on license plates, right? You're getting back. Doug is getting to be Doug again, right? And it's kind of a bit of a dick. And I think
that shot he took at the teachers, I don't think went over well.
Didn't make any sense. And so if he's going to start getting more undisciplined, then, it's just going to raise the stakes, I think, within the Conservative Party saying, what is that 30 a ceiling or a floor? And can we afford to let this guy be the guy?
We don't need to talk about this issue itself because it's not important. License plates. It's not important. But when we last met in Ottawa 2 weeks ago in front of the lovely people from the Canadian Nuclear Association, we already thought this license plate issue had gone on for an hysterically long
I think it was 16 days at
period
that point,
of time. And we were wondering how an issue could be dragged out like that. And today that is still a live issue with more stuff coming out. So what does it tell us about this government and its ability to issue manage that it has not been able to put this license plate issue to bed for a month?
You're looking at me. I'm looking at you.
Listen, there is no defending it. This issue was managed absolutely terribly. I can't imagine how it could have been managed worse. If it had been me and the cop had tweeted something out on Sunday night, my response would have been, we didn't know this. We're looking into it.
Yeah.
Love the first responders. We'll get back to you. And so I think what happened was the government seemingly defended this license plate issue for 3 days. This was the hill they were going to die on. And then it became evident, 4 days, 5 days in that it wasn't going away, and there actually was a problem with the license plates, and it was just miscommunication. Lisa Thompson, who's lovely, she did that press conference the Wednesday or Thursday the first week where she was defending it.
It was so good.
The decision and talking about the Liberal license plates, and like the look on the media.
Who's behind her on the list of getting into cabinet? Like who are the people below her on the list of getting into cabinet? They must.
When they moved her out of education, they put her in charge of license plates. What's next?
At the end of the day, Lisa wasn't the minister when she's defending a decision that she had nothing to do with. She was
that has
shuffled
no
into.
bearing on the brutal press conference.
No, it was a brutal press conference. Like the look on the media's face. This wasn't like a cabinet minister saying something and Benzie rolling his eyes and saying this is ridiculous. The look on their faces was she could have been speaking Klingon and they would have had the exact same look on their faces.
But when irrational things happen in government, there usually is a logic behind it. It may be a logic that defies reason. It may be a logic that we don't accept, but there must be some explanation, some logic behind it. And I think we got a clue about that logic on the license plates a day or two ago when Rob Benzie with the Toronto Star broke the story saying that the Premier himself personally had a hand in picking the license plate. I think that when the Premier himself says, you know what, if there's one thing I know, it's stickers and license plates, and I'm going to involve myself in this, and once he has a personal ownership and pride of ownership on it, then a cabinet minister like Lisa Thompson says, well, I got to go out there and defend this stupid thing because it's about, it's actually rooted in the Premier. And within the apparatus of government, they manage the issue and tiptoe around it in a different way than they would if it didn't have the personal imprimatur of the Premier on it. So I think that's the explanation. I think it's BOD Doug. I think it's bit of dick Doug. And therefore, the government tiptoed around this thing until it couldn't afford to continue on, and it's just been a slow-motion car wreck.
Isn't there something about the way it managed it that tells you something about issue management generally, which is obviously from the beginning, their number one desire was to keep this decision away from Ford. And so they kind of, by not taking any accountability for the decision, by not approaching it with humility and accountability, they sort of dared the media to go and find Ford's culpability and keep uncovering things about this story. They could have, with a different tone and approach, probably ended this thing almost immediately. But they've sent people on a wild goose chase to figure out how did this license plate thing go down.
Listen, we've all been on sides of winning issues, and we've all lost issues. And I think in all cases, we all try to protect our bosses when we're managing issues. As I said, if it was me, I would have probably put this to bed on Sunday. But I'm also not there. I don't know all. You don't know everything in the back room. But I don't think we have to spend as much time on license plates as we did about the downturn in the economy and the factors of pandemic across the world.
Yeah, I agree. The last thing I would just say, though, I just want to reinforce, because I can't help it.
I know you guys like it, but...
No, that's all fair ball. That's all fair ball. It's disproportionate, but it does tell us, independent of the silliness of the issue itself, it tells, I can't help but believe that the reason that the issue managed it so poorly is because Ford had his finger on it from the start, and therefore... if it had just been Lisa Thompson or her predecessor, they would have just rolled this thing over in a day or two. But because he had his imprimatur on it, they had to manage it differently, and it's slow motion. What other decisions are like that? And again, so when we talk about this earlier question about do you want to go into the election with this guy, it's going to be an ever-present consideration. If you got to tiptoe around the combustible Premier, then, boy, you're going to make the job a shitload harder for yourself, Conservatives.
We have to take a short break for a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back. February 27th, 2020 was an historic day for Ontario's 80,000 realtors. On February 27th, the Trust in Real Estate Services Act, or TRESA, passed the third and final vote in the Ontario Legislature with all party support. Having TRESA become law is a huge win for realtors, their clients, and hardworking Ontario families. It means Ontario home buyers and sellers can have greater confidence that the realtor at their side during the largest financial transaction of their life has the highest professional standards, training, and modern tools in North America, including the ability to form personal real estate corporations. OREA has been advocating for updated real estate legislation for close to 2 decades and want to thank Premier Doug Ford and Minister Lisa Thompson for making this dream a reality, and MPPs Tom Rakovic and Mike Schreiner for lending their support to this bill as well. Do you like politics? Dumb question. That's why you're here, isn't it? So if you've never heard of Queen's Park Today, it's one of Ontario's most trusted news sources for political insiders and for people who actually need to know what's happening at the legislature every day. Whether it affects your business, your stakeholders, or party politics, Queen's Park Today tells you what's going down in committee meetings, in question period, and on the ground. It lands in your inbox first thing every morning so you can start your day off already ahead of the game. Traditional media outlets are dying. The only way to really get the detailed boots-on-the-ground coverage you need is by subscribing to Queen's Park Today. There's also BC Today and Alberta Today, which are great for people who want to know what's going on out west but don't have the time to follow it closely. To get a free 2-week trial of Queen's Park Today, BC Today, or Alberta Today, go to politicstoday.news and hit the free trial button. That's politicstoday.news/free trial. Okay, Scott and Jenni, we are back. Let's briefly check in on the federal Conservative leadership race, which has actually had a pretty big development since we last talked about it, which is the endorsement of Erin O'Toole by the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney has been in the past described to me as the most important or influential, or one of the most important or influential Conservatives in Canada. I presume he didn't do this lightly. I presume he did this knowing what everybody else says about the odds of McKay winning. So an interesting tactic all around. Jenni, do you want to start us off with some thoughts?
Sure. Well, I think it's a great endorsement for Erin. It put a bit of wind in his sails. Jason is very well thought of in the party, still a very popular person within our membership, and maybe more importantly, has a network of people across the country that he has cultivated and have organized for him for years. When he was organizing different in different communities. Across the country. So yeah. I am assuming that he's probably making calls to his former organizers, not just in Alberta, but in Ontario and elsewhere, to get behind.
So not just a pro forma endorsement, but leaning in.
That I believe he's leaning in from everything I've heard.
Yeah.
But we'll see if it matters. At the end of the day, and I think I've said this before, I think Peter has such a commanding front runner status currently, and campaigns matter. Don't get me wrong. Sure. And there's 3 months left, a month and a half left for membership sales. I think it's still going to be hard for any challenger to make up the difference. And I think that for the most part, I think the last 2 weeks for McKay's campaign in terms of logistics or messaging, he had a rocky start. I think have improved. I would say probably the last 2 weeks, minus the Kenney endorsement, were probably the best 2 weeks that Peter's had.
Can you help me, Jenni, understand in what metric you measure that McKay has such a huge lead? Is this in sort of key party organizers that have signed up? Is this in elite endorsement across the country? How are you measuring McKay's lead?
Organizers are one of them. From what the information, I have friends in literally all the campaigns, minus I think one or two. That I speak to, so I kind of measure it on that. And frankly, some of it is just my gut. This is a party where I was a ground organizer for many years, especially here in the province of Ontario, and I could be totally wrong, but I still talk to a lot of people across the country, and that is just where my gut is.
Right. So, Scott. We just saw an example in the Democratic primary of an endorsement making all the difference in the world. An endorsement literally taking a campaign that was headed in one direction and completely 180 degrees pivoting it. We also have seen other endorsements. In 1990 leadership, when Paul Martin was running against Jean Chrétien, Paul had the support of Premier Clyde Wells, Premier Frank McKenna, Premier Robert Bourassa, Premier David Peterson, and Liberal leader in Alberta, Lawrence Decore, and Saskatchewan, Ralph Goodale. And we got smoked in every one of those provinces by Chrétien.
Yep.
Right? Now, none of those people leaned into their endorsement. There was a paper endorsement. In fact, you might have thought Wells was actually more supportive of Chrétien by the end.
Yes.
But nonetheless, it is possible that they're not worth the paper they're printed on.
Well, look at the last, not to jump in, sorry, Scott, but look at the last two Ontario PC leadership races. Christine Elliott had all of caucus, and Patrick Brown won.
Right.
And in the leadership race that followed, Christine had essentially almost all of caucus again. Doug had Raymond Cho, and that was it. And it didn't matter. I'm someone that believes that endorsements generally don't matter, but we'll see how much Jason leans into this. That being said, Jason's the premier of a province where he's doing a lot of shit, and so
he's busy.
He's busy. So even if there was an expectation or people assumed that he would lean in, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that Erin's leadership campaign is going to be his number 1, 2, or 3 priority in the next couple months.
Right. That'll make sense. I assume, because I take my cue from someone like Jenni that knows better, I assume that Peter McKay is going to win this leadership race. I assume he has a commanding lead. I can't defend the metrics because I don't have the access to the same network, but that's my impression. And so I assume that that's going to be the case. I also assume that in a case where front page headlines and the constant stream of news is dominated by coronavirus and everyone's response to it, it's going to be very difficult for a leadership campaign that's behind, like Erin O'Toole's, to make enough news to punch through and make a difference. So I think for all those reasons, McKay will probably win. But this is an extraordinary endorsement in my view, because I don't see it so much as an endorsement from McKinney, from Kenney of Erin O'Toole, as I see it a condemnation of McKay. Like, his language was atypical for an endorsement, and it wasn't direct. It wasn't because of
the use of albatrosses was very deliberate, and directed clearly at what he considered to be an unacceptable position by McKay.
And that got a lot of attention, and he picked up that phrase on purpose, and it clearly was making the argument that McKay is, to borrow your word, unacceptable. In addition, he said earlier in his comment, in his statement, he actually said, Conservatives deserve a principled and competent leader. By implication, Peter McKay is not those things in the estimation of Jason Kenney. Those are extraordinary things. Lots of endorsements. The reasons endorsements don't matter is you say, well, on balance, I'd like to say I've known David Herle for X number of years, and I'd like to see him. He'll be a great leader, and rah, 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 right? It doesn't mean I hate the other guy. It doesn't mean much. To me, independent of whether McKay wins or not, it means that Kenney has declared him unsuitable. And so I'll be interested. I assume that the party will come together and they'll figure that out if McKay wins, but I'll be interested to see how McKay and Kenney handle that, because it's a condemnation. It was extraordinary language for an endorsement that he employed against McKay, and it'll be interesting to see how they manage that.
So part of McKay's 2-week run was a call for an October election, which was followed up, I think, by O'Toole saying there should also be a fall election. So is that the mood of the Conservative Party, that as soon as you get a leader, you should be looking to take down the government and go back to the people?
I think we'll see. I think from a communications point of view, it's not a bad idea. It actually puts I think it puts some of the opposition parties on the back on their heels. The NDP and the Bloc are going to have to explain to Canadians and Quebecers as to why they're propping up this government, who so seemingly since the last election has been utterly fucking useless. And so I think that putting the onus on them, let Jagmeet Singh explain why he's propping up this Liberal government.
Scott, the last polling data I saw was virtually a perfect storm against the current government.
Yeah,
it had the Conservatives up by 6-7 points.
Yep.
It had the NDP in the 20s. At 22, and it had the Bloc decisively leading in Quebec. So that is the perfect storm scenario where everybody but the Liberal Party benefits from an election campaign.
Right.
Do you think that we are going to have an election campaign in this calendar year?
I don't think so, but I don't dismiss it. And I think, we are reminded that the calendar has its own mind. We talked about this 2-3 months ago when the aftermath of the election, and everybody said with reasonable certainty, including us, certainly me, I'll at least take it on myself, because of the Bloc, because of their desire to, remain in place, and we're very unlikely to see an election. This is a stable minority. We're probably going to see it last for 2-3 years. It might even be one of those rare minorities that goes a full 4-year term, blah, blah, blah. And now look at what's happening to the world. It's being upended. And we don't know how the government management of this moment will unfold in the next 2 months, and we don't know what the judgment of Canadians will be on that management. And so it seems to me that the government is in a precarious place. And it must be guided by being the best possible government it can and responding to this crisis in the most responsible fashion possible. If it takes care of that, then the politics probably take care of themselves and there won't be an election. If it fails in that, then for sure an election and the threat of political punishment is very much real.
But from a practical point of view, we really think the NDP can go into an election? They had no money in the last election. What are they going to do in this one?
Well, we like to, because we're liberals,
things slide off the map,
we like to bash them around on this show. So let's give them their due when they're merited. What is behind them being in the 20s in the polling? Like, what's happening to the NDP? What's happening to the government that the NDP are rising?
Well, it could simply be that there is dissatisfaction with the Liberals right now.
Sure.
So people are just kind of parking their vote with the NDP. But the NDP, and you're the pollster on this, there are a lot of instances where they poll higher than what they actually get during an election campaign. And from a practical point of view, we see how campaigns someone can start off really well at the start of a campaign and they fizzle out. Look at Elizabeth May during the last federal election. I just don't know from a practical point of view if they have the money to be able to go into a campaign. So if you're Jagmeet Singh and you're his advisors and they're like, okay, well, we can pull the plug and we're sitting at 22%, but we have no money in the bank. We can't secure a bank loan because we spent it all in the last election. We've mortgaged our building twice.
Right.
So I just think from a practical point of view, I don't see that there's going to be an election, but I think that it is if there is, fine. But I think Jagmeet Singh needs to stand up and say why there isn't going to be an election and defend why he is supporting.
But
Justin
in 1979,
I think if they're at 22%, they can borrow money.
In 1979, the Socreds could not afford an election. They would be decimated if there was an election, and there was an election. So, I mean, irrationality becomes part of this. And all I would say is, if you're the Liberal Party, if you're the Liberal government right now, you say, I am at sea with stormy hurricane weather, and you can't take it for granted that you're just going to make your way back to shore because that's what you always do. I mean, this is a moment of real political jeopardy for anybody who's in government, because the decisions you make and the tone with which you make them in the next number of weeks could spell your Waterloo.
What is your observation, though? If the government's leaking to the left, what's been happening that would cause it to leak to the left?
I'm not certain. Perhaps it's been that we've seen a greater discussion around around pipelines, and you saw so much disaffection around blockades. It may have had a polarizing effect that, folks on the left said, I don't feel that Trudeau's being true to his ethic. The Prime Minister's in a tough spot in that, right? You're in a perfect place where you can make everyone unhappy. So it may be that.
There may
I don't
be
know.
No center on that issue.
Yeah. I don't have a wiser explanation than that.
Okay. Can't end our show without talking a little bit about the Democratic primary, which has been quite something since we last talked about it.
I can smell my $1,000 again. For a while, I thought my $1,000 was gone, but now I can almost smell my $1,000.
I've already spent it in my head.
Awesome. That's great. It'll be like 2,000 when I win it.
Because Biden's coming back, you think?
I think... Is
Biden more likely to beat Trump or die of the coronavirus?
It's very hard to call. Dark joke, though that may be. Man, oh man. I mean, it's so weird. The party's mission was that it had to reject Byrne, and it appears that it's done that. But in order to do that, it had to rally around Biden, which seems like such a strange gamble. He looks so frail, so unpredictable in his performance. But I actually think the coronavirus may kill off Trump. Perhaps literally, as you just mentioned. But I mean, I actually think that this may highlight a whole series of inadequacies with his presidency, because it is a moment of crisis, and his every instinct is to talk about himself, not the public.
Okay, but did you watch his press conference yesterday? I already talked about. He's further ahead than what Canada is. He had a very
for fuck's sake! Come on,
nobody
Jenny.
Cares about what
people
cares
do actually
about
care.
what he tweets.
No, they do. They do.
You guys are so irrational when it comes to
I am not
Donald
being
Trump.
irrational.
He had Go back and watch
I've got
his
natural
press
ability.
conference.
Can we use the flu vaccine? The guy can't piss in a straight line, and people are actually looking for a leader who can piss in a straight line in this situation.
Wait a second. Surely you're going to draw a distinction between Trump personally and the administration. Surely what you're saying is that the administration.
No, Trump headed up the press conference yesterday, late afternoon, and talked about the programs that I talked about. A program for people on hourly wages, payroll tax deductions, working with the tourism industry. It was him that said it.
Are you going to gamble your $1,000 on his careful, competent management of this crisis?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I'll take it in cash today then. You're crazy. Look at the guy.
No, but
if his administration doesn't rally to fortify him,
like he's gonna lose to an 80-year-old guy who walks around and sniffs people's hair.
Well, I don't know that he's going to lose to Biden. I think Biden is a terrible candidate.
But he's going to win. So
Trump has to defeat
himself. So if you look, so we're tonight we're looking at 6 races. The six primaries. You got Michigan, which Bernie won last time, which was a harbinger for things to come for Hillary because it was her ignoring the Rust Belt states.
Yeah.
He's in double digits leading there. He's poised to win Mississippi. He's over 50% in Missouri. The only state right now they're saying that Bernie could win is Idaho. And Bernie's campaign himself, he has said himself, he's been disappointed. His campaign's not been able to galvanize the young voters again.
You know why? You know fucking why?
Because he's an old crazy man.
No, he was last time too. It's because they don't have the same villain. I'm sad to say. He's not running against Hillary Clinton. That's what that all says to me.
That's right.
Is how much Hillary Clinton was hated. That these massive numbers of people came out to vote for Bernie, to block her. They're not coming out to block Biden. Or
it's an anti-establishment within the Democratic Party
but
thing.
She was a
doesn't seem to be
special
galvanizing
symbol, and there's, I mean, it's. Yeah.
But Sanders actually has become crazier in the last 4 years. Like
sure,
his
and
comments.
he had a heart attack like last Wednesday. It's ridiculous. So now they're stuck with Biden.
His continued defending of Fidel Castro, for example, in his literacy programs. Like it's absolute absolute insanity. And so the fact that Biden has become the candidate when we all think he's a terrible candidate.
Terrible. But he and his depends may make it across the finish line and beat Trump. Just because Trump himself, I think you overestimate Trump's appeal beyond the always Trumpers.
And you would underestimate it.
Well, that's quite possible.
You guys are way too you're so irrational on this topic. You can't just.
You can't accuse me of irrationality and then in the same breath say that the reason that you think he's going to get reelected is his careful, competent management of the coronavirus.
No, I didn't say that's the reason he's going to get reelected, but I don't think it's the reason he's going to lose.
All right. Well, I think it's actually going to deal a pretty severe blow to him. I really do. I think it's going to have a lasting effect.
Because it's going to be a dumb George W. Bush FEMA management, or because he's going to continue to be insensitive, self-centered, narcissistic.
All of that. I think those things conflate.
Go back and watch his press conference. The United States, led by him, is head and shoulders above what our fucking government has been doing.
Well, wait a second. I don't know enough detail to even combat you on that, so I won't. But let's just deal with personal comportment. The things he's saying and the way he's talking are kind of the exact opposite of what you would normally be asking a leader to do in terms of showing empathy for what's going on.
How many average American people are on Twitter?
But
you don't have to be on Twitter to see what he's saying. He's
on the news too. He's everywhere. The guy's inescapable, and If I'll concede, I didn't see the full press conference, but let's say that it was the best press conference he's ever given. Let's say he played it according to Hoyle. He won't tomorrow, right? He'll go back to being himself, and in this circumstance, I think the political jeopardy around that's pretty high. Okay,
we can as we end all conversations on Trump, we can agree to disagree.
I can't even agree on that. Fuck.
So it's a close election. It's coming down to the wire, and we're going to have Joe Biden up against Donald Trump. Why wouldn't those of us who are against Trump want to have the whip-smart Elizabeth Warren up against Donald Trump, who, in one of the most remarkable debate performances of all time, utterly disemboweled Mike Bloomberg on national television gutted $500 million worth of campaign spending.
And created the space for Biden's resurrection.
Created the space for Biden's resurrection. All of that. I mean, it would have been so delicious to watch her have Trump for an hour and a half to play with. Oh my God!
Listen, I was the one that said that. I was the one that said she was the candidate that the Democrats should pick, but they didn't.
Right.
I said this 2 months ago when we talked about this. I said she was the only one before that debate. I said she was the only one that would muck it up with him. And registered Democrats, I didn't think the same thing.
Would have been great. He walks behind her in the presidential debate. She turns around and chews his throat out. Like, it would just be awesome.
You know, it was. I was not surprised that debate performance didn't help her, though.
Yeah.
Because based on everything that I have come to learn about female political candidacies, she was far too aggressive to be an acceptable woman. Women cannot play that game and still be likable, at least by men.
Well, I think it's not just it's not just in front behind the podium. It's I think in the back rooms as well. But I agree. I agree with you, but I think that I'm hoping eventually that starts to change because she was, I thought, remarkable in that debate.
Christy Clark said to me that women can be tough or likable, but not both.
Yeah.
And men can be both. Right. And I think that she ran into that.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I don't disagree.
I'd like to, but it's not obvious to me what alters that. You know. We can say that appears to be true, and it's terrible that that's true, and we would hope that it would change. But I don't understand it completely, right? So if you don't, I don't know what's going to make it change, right? Because there's an irrationality at the center of it. So what magically makes women candidates get evaluated differently? I don't know the answer to that question. We couldn't figure it out when it came to Kathleen. So Bob's your uncle on it, but men, if anything, seem to be getting pissier in their
It's not going to be solved by a campaign tactic in a campaign because it's deeply rooted in our culture and in our belief systems.
And men seem to be getting, angrier. I don't know, angrier. Yeah, I was going to say reactionary. That's the wrong word, angrier. They seem to be getting angrier with their ballot.
Well, they're feeling loss of power.
Right.
Right? And they're fighting back against that. Bloomberg's an epic fail, but Bloomberg, if he'd been as good as one would have expected a multi-term mayor of New York City to be, he could have won.
Yep.
He had the money, but he wasn't. But
the money got him. The money got him the chance, right?
The money. He
still had to push it over the top, but the money got him there.
Yep.
Right.
The money got him the chance, but he wasn't.
Right.
Biden's resurrection was more improbable than Christ's, and it tells us that if Bloomberg had not gotten gutted on that stage, that he could have been Biden, right? Like if it happened to Biden, then it could have happened to Bloomberg. And Elizabeth Warren, she may have changed the course of the election. Okay, if Jenny's right and Trump gets reelected because people decide that Biden is
but at the end of the day, if it wasn't that, it was going to be something else. He proved that he was just a terrible candidate. Like it wasn't like he was flat-footed on a debate. He just proved time and time again to be terrible. So if it wasn't going to be Elizabeth Warren at that debate, it was going to be something else that would have shown people that he was just completely out of his depth.
Yeah.
Thanks, folks. This was fun. It's great. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and I'll be back next week. We'll look forward to chatting with you in a couple of weeks. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS. I want to thank our sponsors, Aurea and Queen's Park Today. I'd like to thank Andy for filming this and Metal for audio recording it, and the Orange Lounge for hosting us as always. If you liked the pod, if you enjoyed it, say something nice on social media or go to iTunes and rank it. Helps get the word around and helps keep this podcast on the air. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in a week.
Herle Burly, Herle Burly.